quality standards that say how clean our water bodies are for different uses. We're assessing whether or not those water quality standards and uses are being met. And we're issuing permits to individuals who are interested in doing activities that are potentially harmful or may modify what we define as waters of the state, which is most of our rivers, lakes, and streams here in Michigan. In addition, we do what is primarily my role with the department, and that's support voluntary activities to protect water quality through things like grants, education and outreach, and technical assistance. Now, it's always important when I give presentations to groups of residents to sort of set expectations up front. I know this is a group that has some interest in some different proposed development projects here in the area. So it's important for you guys to understand what we at the department can and can't do as a regulatory agency. So just that you understand as you're having conversations with each other, with local officials, with developers, you know when the state may or may not need to be involved. So what we can do, we issue permits for any activities that may have an impact on water quality, and then we ensure that through those permits, actions are taken to minimize or offset any potential negative impacts to water quality that occur as a result of a variety of different proposed activities. It's important to remind you that that is in accordance with the authorities that are delegated to us through the Federal Clean Water Act and the State Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. And all that says is that where we have the ability to act, we have a lot of power and authority, and where we don't, we're very limited in what we can do. In addition to issuing those permits, we have the authority to undertake compliance and enforcement activities that relate to those permits. And that includes penalties, damages, violations, enforcement in situations where those requirements aren't being met or activities are taking place without a permit that do require a permit. Now, additionally, we can also do what we're doing today, provide education to our stakeholders, governments, and the public on what we do and don't regulate, the science behind those regulations, and we can also provide recommendations for what we think a best management practice for water quality would be. In some cases, those may be required recommendations. In other cases, they are just recommendations that may not be required by the scope of the statute. Now, as far as what we can't do, and this is important to know just to set expectations, state of Michigan is a home rule state, which means as a state government body, we can't do anything to supersede or influence a local decision unless that power is directly granted to us by one of these statutes. So a good example of that would be, we don't have the ability to influence a local decision. We can't come out for or against something that's taking place on a local level. All we can do is ensure that if a project does move forward, that our statutes and regulations are being met. Additionally, we can't require any actions that's kind of obvious outside the scope of our regulatory authority. And all of our staff are pretty well trained on what our authorities are, where those lines are, and when we can and can't cross them. And then finally, that third one there, I think is really important, and maybe is probably there's a lot of misunderstanding about what Egle can and can't do, is that we are not a lawmaking agency. In fact, very few, if any, government bureaucratic agencies are. Our legislature makes laws, the state and federal legislature, and we at the agency are responsible for implementing those laws. So we do have some ability to create rules or set policies that say, here's how we're going to do what the legislature has asked us to do. But widespread sweeping changes in environmental regulations here in Michigan need to come from local governments and from the legislature. So if you're someone who considers yourself an advocate and you're trying to target where you want your advocacy to go to see meaningful changes, oftentimes working with your legislatures, both at the state and federal level, or your local governments, or where a lot of your energy can be most effectively spent. Although certainly we want to hear your concerns too. I don't want to downplay that at all, just to understand we're not always able to act. But what you guys are all here to talk about today, this is the Terabisi Creek sub-watershed. You can see here, the blue outline is the Terabisi Creek itself, and then the area surrounding it is the watershed, that is the area of land that drains to that creek. And when we're looking at water quality in the creek, it's very important not only to consider the creek itself, but also the land that drains to it, because anything we do on the land in that highlighted area has the potential to impact water quality in Terabisi Creek through stormwater runoff. So you can see we've got two counties covered here, county line right here. So we've got parts of Farmington Hills, a little bit of Novi, but a bulk of the watershed is down here in Livonia, a tiny bit in Redford Township. How many of you guys lived in the Terabisi Creek sub-watershed, by show of hands? Quite a few, most of you, if not all, not surprising. We're neighbors. I don't know if you guys knew that, but I call this watershed my home. I live right around here, just on the north side, on the Farmington side of 8 Mile. I live here in the Terabisi Creek watershed, so I certainly share your interest in protecting water quality here in the creek. But it's always important to remember this connection between a watershed and a body of water when we're looking at what potential water quality issues here are. So we have to look at what the land use is like. So here's a map of land use in the area around Terabisi Creek. This was put together by Cindy and her colleagues at Friends of the Rouge using some data from some local governments. This shows what land use today is like here in Terabisi Creek watershed. This is actually 2011. Things haven't changed much since then. And as you can see, we're primarily working with a highly developed watershed, mostly residential development, suburban, some denser urban, some light industrial. But the point is we're looking at buildings, streets, houses, roadways. That's the predominant land use in Terabisi Creek. There are a few exceptions to that. You can see down here this big green area, that's the Rotary Park green space, and nature trails. Definitely one of my favorite places in the watershed to enjoy the creek. And we do have a few locations of park and natural land along the creek there, but for the most part we're dealing with residential land. And that's a stark change from what the watershed used to look like prior to European settlement. This is land use circa 1800, and you can see, like most of Michigan, it was forested. That was a mosaic of upland forests and lowland swamps, so wetlands and upland forests. And over time, we've extensively modified this watershed to suit our own purposes, and that has resulted in the issues of water quality that we see in the creek today. Now, anytime I'm wondering about how healthy a water body is, the first thing I do is I go online and I go to this How's My Waterway website. This is a database that's maintained by EPA. It's essentially the clearinghouse for all of the data that we at the state level do to assess whether or not a creek is healthy via the Clean Water Act. And so in the middle here, what you see are what we call the designated uses. And these are all the things that we, as citizens of the state of Michigan, might want to use Terabisi Creek for. So we might use it as a source for watering agriculture. We might want to use it for partial or total body contact, which would be swimming or recreation via personal watercraft. We might want to have a recreational fishery, or we might want to eat those fish. These are all potential uses of the water body. And in addition, we assess water bodies basically for the health of their ecosystem, their value to wildlife and fish that live in the water body. And when you look at whether or not we're meeting these designated uses in this column right here, see it's not great for Terabisi Creek. There's a lot of red, a lot of impaired there. There are various reasons for that. On the right, I've listed the information that our monitoring data has identified as problems for Terabisi Creek. I'm going to go into this in more detail in the following slides. This will help us get an idea of what our problems are today, and then when we go to look at potential solutions for how to solve those problems. First one is the fish consumption. That was an impairment. The primary reason for that impairment was listed as PCBs. These are polychlorinated biphenyls. They're an industrial chemical used in a variety of industrial processes, also in things like electrical transformers, hydraulic oils. The primary source of these in the entire Rouge River watershed was historical paper mill operations, most of which have long since shut down. And in fact, the use of these chemicals has been regulated in the years since those operations were active. But unfortunately, PCBs fall under what we would call legacy contaminants. These are contamination that stick around in the environment long after those sources have been eliminated. They stick to the sediment, and then over time they actually accumulate within the wildlife, within the food chain itself. And so these are highly present in fish tissues. They can cause human health issues if fish are consumed from water bodies with PCB contamination too readily. And the unfortunate reality is that this is an issue that we'll probably be stuck with for some time. While we have eliminated the source, it takes a long time for these things to be removed from the environment. So in the meantime, the best thing you can do is be cautious around eating fish from the Rouge River. Some of you may have heard we also have contamination issues with various PFAS compounds in the Rouge River. That's something to be on the lookout for too. But in order to stay safe, the Department of Health and Human Services releases an Eat Safe Fish Guide annually that goes through all of the water bodies where people regularly eat fish, tells you which types of fish are there that are usually consumed and how many it's safe to eat. I put the results of that down at the bottom here. Bottom line is don't eat too many fish from Terabisi Creek. Really more than one fillet a month is potentially harmful to human health. And I don't think many people are regularly eating fish out of Terabisi Creek anyway, but it is something to be mindful of.